Presenting to you the 2024 River Herring Benchmark Stock Assessment. This stock assessment is a product of the ASMFC River Herring SAS and the Shad and River Herring TC. River herring is still a data poor species complex that is challenging to assess, but we've made some progress since the 2012 benchmark. We have an improved understanding of the stock structure. We've added some new data sets. We have abundance trends and/or mortality estimates for 84 rivers, representing 105 stocks of river herring. We have refined the methods for trend analysis and Z estimates, and we have some new modeling approaches, including a hierarchical growth model for each species, a stochastic SPR reference point model, a habitat model, and have done some work on data limited bycatch cap options. In this presentation, I will go through stock structure, then data, methods, stock status, followed by bycatch caps and research recommendations. First, stock structure. For the last benchmark, we assessed river herring at the river level and then pooled up to state to summarize the trends. And we developed Z reference points at the coastwide level, but the SAS felt that using stock regions to pool data and summarize trends was more biologically meaningful than using states. So in this assessment, we assessed alewife and blueback herring at the river level wherever possible, and then used genetic stock regions to pool data where necessary for reference points and to summarize trends. Our stock regions are based on genetic work by Reed et al. 2018. Here you see our stock regions. On the left are alewife, on the right are blueback herring. The points are the points that were used by Reed et al. To determine these. For alewife, we used 3 stock regions, the northern New England, southern New England, and mid-Atlantic. For blueback herring, we used 5 regions, Canada, northern New England. Of course, we used only the US portion of this region, mid-New England, southern New England, mid-Atlantic, and South Atlantic. Moving on to data, we're going to talk about landings and bycatch, and then indices and run counts. Our total removals are going to be presented as river herring removals because it's difficult to separate by species, especially for the historical landings. And we present in weight and numbers, which means some translation there. So commercial landings and bycatch in weight are converted to numbers. Recreational total catch in numbers is converted to weight. Our conversions are based on the average size of river herring for each sector where our sampling was available. Here's our total removals in weight. Note that the historical ones may be incomplete. The yellow is the US commercial landings from ACCSP. The blue is the foreign fleets landings. The pink is the US recreational landings, and the green is bycatch. And we see here that the total removals have declined significantly since the 1950s and 60s. And in the last 10 years, total removals averaged about 2.67 million pounds per year, which is about 4% of the reported landings at the height of the directed fishery. The overall pattern is similar for removals in numbers of fish, which are shown here. In the last 10 years, the total removals averaged 6.83 million fish per year, which is approximately 4% of the average reported landings at the peak of the directed fishery. If we zoom in on the more recent years, we can see that there hasn't been much of a trend in total removals since the mid-1990s. Note that the estimates of recreational catch start in 1982, again, those are in the pink, and the estimates of bycatch start in 1989 in the green. Recreational removals have generally been small and have high PSEs, and bycatch estimates make up a significant component of the current removals. Here you see the proportion of river herring removals for those recent years. And again, we see the commercial landings in yellow, foreign fleet landings in blue, recreational landings in pink, and bycatch in green. And note that bycatch has been about 30 to 75% of removals since 1989. It was much lower than average in 2020 to 2022. So let's look at that recent change. On the left here, there are some numbers from 2005 to 2019, and we'll call that the older period, and 2020 to 2022, we will call that the recent period. So you note that the estimates of bycatch for 20 to 22 were lower than in previous years, and they made up a smaller percentage of the overall removals. So the bycatch averaged about 757,000 pounds per year in that older period, whereas it was only about 200,000 pounds per year in the recent period. That translates to about 281 million fish per year in the older period versus 0.75 million fish per year in the recent period. So in the older period, it was about 20%. The bycatch was about 27% of total removals in weight and 35% of total removals in numbers, whereas in those recent 3 years, it was about only 7.5% of total removals in weight or 10% of total removals in numbers. This was due in part to lower effort in Atlantic herring and mackerel fleets in recent years, but there was also lower observer coverage and port sampling in those years, especially in the mid-Atlantic midwater trawls. So bycatch makes up a higher proportion of total removals by numbers because the average size of the river herring in the bycatch is smaller than the river herring in the in-river fisheries. Here we see the bycatch length composition with alewife on the left and blueback herring on the right. The top row is the in-river directed fishery sampling. The middle row is the in-river fishery independent sampling, and the bottom is the NEFOP bycatch sampling. And length information collected by observers shows that the ocean bycatch, that bottom panel, contains small river herring, defined here as less than 200 millimeters, that are not seen in the in-river monitoring, indicating that the ocean fisheries are catching juvenile and immature river herring as well as mature adults. The TC, moving on to data, so our run counts and indices. The TC reviewed a wide range of state, federal, and academic data sets, and in deciding what to use in the trend analysis, a run count or survey was used if it had 10 or more years of data, had consistent methodology or changes in methods were accounted for, and if it encountered river herring in at least 10% of the trials over the time series. Some surveys or run counts with less than 10 years of data were accepted for use in the next assessment update. So for alewife, we used 52 data sets for trend analysis. 23 of those are run counts, 10 are adult in-river surveys, 11 are recruitment surveys, and 8 are ocean mixed stock surveys. For blueback herring, we used 42 data sets for the trend analysis. That's 10 run counts, 13 adult in-river surveys, 12 recruitment surveys, and 7 ocean mixed stock surveys. In addition, we had 14 run counts that are not separated to species. Now, the SAS assumed that run counts are more like indices than true population counts. They represent trends in abundance, but other factors like passage rates, amount of spawning habitat below the location of the count, environmental factors, etc. mean we don't know how much of the spawning population is actually being counted each year. The different types of data sets are not distributed equally across the coast. These maps show alewife on the left, blueback herring on the right, and the data sources by shape. So run counts, if they are species specific, are shown by yellow circles here. If they are combined species, they are shown by an asterisk. The adult fishery independent surveys are shown by a blue square, and the pink triangle denotes young of year or juvenile indices. And you'll note that most of the run counts are in the northern regions, and most of the surveys are in the mid-Atlantic region. The South Atlantic region for blueback herring is particularly data poor. That was our data. Now we're going to move on to methods. For methods, we will first speak of trend analysis, then our mortality comparisons to reference points, and then the habitat model. For trend analysis, we looked at Mann-Kendall trends, which detect an increasing or decreasing trend over the time series. We also looked at autoregressive integrated moving average. We use that to minimize measurement error and decrease variance. And then we looked at the probability that the terminal year of that ARIMA index is greater than either the reference year of 2009 or greater than the 25th percentile of the time series. We used 2009, which was the year Amendment 2 was adopted for river herring, as the reference year to try to address the question of whether river herring abundance has changed since management action was taken. This trend analysis was applied to run counts, indices, and life history characteristics. We found very few significant trends in our life history trend analysis, so that would include maximum age, mean length at age, and percent repeat spawners. There's also some difficulty interpreting those trends. For example, does declining repeat spawner percentage indicate decreased survival in older fish? Or does it indicate that there's higher recruitment and more first-time spawners? So it's hard to determine that without a lot of additional data on recruitment or abundance. Because of this, the TC SAS did not rely on these results for status information, but you can look at the assessment report for detailed results. After the trend analysis, we looked at total mortality compared to reference points. We estimated Z from age data from in-river monitoring using the Poisson GLM method. We used the age of full maturity as the age of full selectivity, which was age 5 for most of the stock regions. We applied this for years with at least 30 samples of at least 3 fully selected ages. Then we calculated a stochastic Z 40% SPR reference point. To do this, instead of using point estimates for the inputs like mortality, maturity, etc., we drew from distribution of parameters and created a distribution of Z 40% SPR estimates. We developed these reference points for each stock region. So the probability of Z being above the Z 40% SPR reference point incorporates an uncertainty from both the Z estimate and the reference point. Note that our total mortality was based on adult mortality only with no influence of juvenile mortality. Another way that we tried to assess the data was by using a habitat model. This model is a simulation model to look at the effects of habitat loss on the productivity of alewife and blueback herring in each stock region. It's similar to the model that was used for American shad during the 2020 benchmark, but the life history information and habitat data were updated to reflect alewife and blueback herring stock regions. All of our results are in the assessment report in detail. If you look at table 28 and table 39, it gives you a river by river summary. And in this presentation, I'm going to summarize the results coastwide and by stock region. The tables, though, will show you the Mann-Kendall trend over the entire time series, the Mann-Kendall trend since 2009, the probability of the latest year of the ARIMA being above the 25th percentile, and also of it being above the index as of 2009, and the probability of Z being above the Z 40% SPR reference point in the most recent year. So on to stock status. We're first going to discuss what we learned from the habitat model, then the Mann-Kendall trends, then the ARIMA comparison to reference, and then the total mortality comparison to reference. There are a lot of stock status challenges for river herring. River herring abundance is affected by a number of factors. It's affected by directed fishing, bycatch, habitat loss and degradation, passage mortality, and environmental factors, including predation and climate change. Also, each river system has its own challenges, and for almost all stocks, we have only one data source. And to add even more challenges, all of our data sets on abundance and mortality start well after the peak of the directed fishery in the 1960s and the collapse of landings during the 1970s. So the habitat model tells us that a significant amount of river herring spawning habitat has been lost or made difficult to access due to dams. In these maps here, blueback herring's on the left, alewife is on the right. It shows how many dams are in each part of the river. The darker redder colors indicate river herring have more barriers to accessing the habitat. So for instance, that darkest red area, the river herring would have to cross upwards of a dozen dams to get to those areas. So the loss of access to spawning habitat results in a lower potential abundance. Here, I will show you alewife. The Y value here is the coastwide alewife abundance in millions of fish. And across the bottom, there are 3 scenarios. There's a no passage scenario on the left, a no dams scenario on the right, and the current scenario in the middle. Historical abundance of spawning alewife was predicted to be 352 million fish under the no dam scenario. Abundance under the no passage scenario was 87 million spawning fish, which is a reduction of about 75%. Current levels of passage don't provide much improvement over the no passage scenario. Analogously, for blueback herring, we see the same figure. The mean historical abundance of blueback herring was predicted to be 63 million spawning fish under the no dam scenario. Abundance under the no passage scenario was 41 million spawning fish, which is a reduction of about 35%. And again, current levels of passage do not provide much improvement over the no passage scenario. So what is our habitat model telling us? Well, alewife and blueback herring are depleted relative to historic levels. The habitat model indicates that the overall productivity of the stock is lower now than it was for an unexploited population in an unaltered landscape. But this doesn't incorporate fishing mortality, so it doesn't provide an estimate of true current abundance. Moving on to our abundance trends, this is a figure showing abundance trends over the full time series. On the left is alewife, in the middle is blueback herring, and on the right is river herring unspecified. So the abundance trends are denoted by a red downward pointing triangle if they are decreasing, a green upward pointing triangle if they're increasing, and if there's no significant trend, it's denoted by a black square. And as you see, there's no clear coastwide trends. More of the northern regions seem to have more positive trends, but even within the regions, there are differences from river to river. And then if we look at the trends since 2009, since our reference year, you see even fewer significant trends. You see one decreasing significant trend in blueback, which is the Santee Cooper River. You see two increasing trends for alewife, two for blueback, and two for river herring. The alewife increasing trends are the Damariscotta River run count and the Merrymeeting Bay Young of Year Index. Both of those are in northern New England. And the blueback increasing trends are, again, Merrymeeting Bay Young of Year Index, though, and that's in the Canada, northern New England region, and Albemarle Sound Adult Index in the middle. The ARIMA results compared to the 2009 reference year are shown here. It's the probability of the most recent year of the index being above the 2009 value. The shape indicates the type of data, either survey or run count. The run counts, species specific, are circles. Run counts, combined species, are diamonds. Square is your adult fishery independent surveys, and then triangles, young of year or juvenile. As for color, the darker blue indicates a higher probability, a darker red indicates a lower probability, and lighter colors indicate around a 50% probability of being above the 2009 value. So you can see that the northern points tend to be darker and there are more light colored and redder symbols on the map in southern New England and mid-Atlantic areas, indicating lower probabilities of being above the reference year. Here you see the probability of the most recent Z estimate being above the Z reference point. In this case, shape, again, indicates the type of data. And for color, darker red indicates a higher probability. So red, bad. Darker blue indicates a lower probability, and the lighter colors more of a 50% probability of being above the Z 40% SPR reference point. And most rivers had a higher than 50% chance of total mortality being above the Z reference point, with the more northern regions having a higher probability than the mid-Atlantic. So you would think that's a little counterintuitive from what we just told you about the abundance trends. But out of 105 stocks for which we have data, we only had 26 that had both Z and adult abundance trends. So it was a little bit hard to draw conclusions. So to summarize our stock status here on the left, we look at the time series trends since 2009. The left-hand column is a significant negative trend. The middle is no significant trend, and the right is increasing significant trend. Now the middle column there is the number of data sets with a greater than 50% probability of the terminal year being greater than the 2009 value based on that ARIMA. And on the right, we see the number of rivers with a greater than 50% probability that the mortality in the latest year is greater than the reference point. So you see here for alewife that there's no clear coastwide trend since Amendment 2. There's very few significant trends, but those that are significant are positive. Note that high values are better for the middle column and high values are worse in the in the right-hand column. So you see there's one significant positive trend in northern New England and 3 in the mixed stock ocean, and all the others are non-significant. As for the latest year of the ARIMA being higher than the 2009 value, 92% of the northern New England rivers for which we had values were greater. 67 in southern New England, 65% in mid-Atlantic, and 67% in the mixed stock ocean, so that's good. But then on the right, the number of rivers where the mortality is higher than the reference point is pretty high in northern New England. It's 72% of them, 78% of them in southern New England, and mid-Atlantic, none, so that's great. So the more northern regions seem to have more positive trends, but also higher Z estimates. But even within the regions, there are differences from river to river in terms of trends and in Z estimates. This is the analogous information for blueback herring. And similar to alewife, there's no clear coastwide trends. While the northern regions seem to have more positive trends, they also have higher Z estimates. Again, even within regions, there's differences from river to river in terms of the trends and the Z estimates. There were no species-specific run counts or indices for the southern New England region for blueback herring. So as you see here, we only show the mixed species run counts. In summary, there's no clear coastwide trends since Amendment 2. Some systems are showing positive trends, some negative, and many no detectable trends. The northern regions seem to have more positive trends, but a lot of variability even within regions. Run count increasing trends may be influenced by increased passage efficiency as well. The northern regions have put a lot of effort into habitat restoration and dam removal, but so have states further south, and they have not seen the same positive trends in run counts and indices. The northern New England stock region also accounts for the majority of the directed catch in recent years, while states in middle New England, southern New England, and mid-Atlantic stock regions have closed their fisheries. So what other factors are affecting river herring abundance? One of them may be the bycatch influence. So Reed et al. In 2022 looked at the genetic composition of ocean bycatch from Cape Cod, Long Island Sound, New Jersey area, which has historically had a high fishing effort and high estimates of river herring bycatch. And in this area, the majority of alewife bycatch was from the southern New England stock region, and the majority of the blueback herring bycatch was from the mid-Atlantic stock region. These are two stock regions that have more negative trends in recent years, despite habitat restoration efforts and directed fishery closures. So let's move on to talking about possible bycatch methods. Concerns about the impacts of ocean bycatch led the board to include a TOR to develop methods to calculate biologically based cap or a limit on bycatch of river herring in ocean fisheries. A proof of concept approach was developed using data limited methods to set bycatch caps based on trends in alewife and blueback herring abundance. We used the iSmooth and the iSlope methods. These were peer reviewed in the 2020 index-based methods and control rules research track assessment. And these methods had the highest median catch among the methods that achieved rebuilding more than 50% of the time. The iSmooth and iSlope are conceptually very similar. The slope of the index in recent years is used to develop a multiplier that's applied to the recent catch with or without additional buffers. Basically, if the index is decreasing, the bycatch cap would decrease, and if the index is increasing, the cap would increase. The data required for this is catch data and index data. The catch data we looked at was the Northeast Fisheries Science Center species-specific coastwide bycatch estimates. The index data for the ocean mixed stock indices was the Northeast Fisheries Science Center bottom trawl and NEMAP. And for run counts, for alewife, we looked at the sum of the southern New England run counts. And for blueback herring, we looked at the sum of the mid-Atlantic run counts. And the stock regions, these were the stock regions, remember, that comprised most of the bycatch based on the study by Reed et al. In 2022. So the final numbers would depend on the method, choice of index, and what kind of buffers are applied. So we ran through some seemingly reasonable numbers and found, and our estimates had they were lower than the current bycatch caps, lower than the coastwide bycatch estimates, but higher than recent estimates of catch against the current caps, because remember, not all the coastwide bycatch of river herring counts against the current caps. So there are pros and cons to using an index-based bycatch cap. So the pros, it's more biologically based than the current historical average approach. So as your indices decline, caps will decline. If indices increase, the caps can go up. The cons are that it's based on index data only. It's not a population model. And it assumes a relationship between the bycatch and the population abundance, although we know that bycatch is only one factor that's affecting river herring abundance. So in order to finalize anything, it would need more work and consultation with managers on the scope and implementation. So what we did was species specific, and the current caps are shad and river herring combined. The caps we came up with are coast-wide, but the current caps are based on specific fisheries and gear area combinations. Data limited methods need more management input on risk and buffer levels. And monitoring at a biologically meaningful scale is difficult. So not all bycatch affects all rivers or stock regions equally, and the current monitoring doesn't include genetics. The TC SAS strongly supported the species distribution modeling approach as an alternative or a complement to the catch caps. Model river herring distributions and identify potential hotspots where the risk of bycatch is increasing, and use time area closures to minimize bycatch instead of an in-season catch cap approach. This avoids some of the issues with intensive monitoring needs of the catch cap approach, but the models need to be developed further. On to research recommendations. The research recommendations are shown in full in the assessment report, along with updates on what we have accomplished thus far, but here we highlight some of the selected recommendations. So the high priority short-term research recommendation for assessment methodology is to continue development of the habitat model or similar models to predict the potential impacts of climate change on river herring distribution and stock persistence, and develop targets for rivers undergoing restoration. Some high priority short-term recommendations for research and data collection are to develop consistent aging protocols across all states, to establish a database of existing data sources with comprehensive metadata and recommendations for use, to expand observer and port sampling coverage, including genetic sampling to better quantify incidental catch of river herring, studies to quantify, improve, and implement standard practices for fish passage efficiency, and to evaluate and validate hydroacoustic methods to quantify river herring spawning run numbers in major river systems. Any questions?